Robert Sarver, since we last spoke about this news story, has commenced the process of selling both the NBA's Phoenix Suns and the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury. He owned both, and now due to a an investigation done by the NBA into his racist conduct, including saying the N-word on multiple occasions, and his inappropriate conduct towards his employees and people that he works with of a sexual nature, comments on women's bodies, comments on whether or not a woman should be working due to a pregnancy and due to having a child that were sexist in nature. He has now been essentially pressured to force to sell the team. The reason for this is not out of some sort of benevolence or a learning of one's lesson. It's that PayPal and other sponsors for the team had essentially said that they're not going to be publicly associated with the Suns anymore. And Adam Silver did hand down the maximum fine or punishment under the bylaws, but if he really wanted to, it could have been a situation like what happened with Donald Sterling. And I should say, not if he really wanted to, if these 30 owners actually wanted to excommunicate Robert Sarver, they could have done so. But there was not the smoking gun in the same way that there was with Sterling in terms of racist conduct. But this is a good news. This is good news. And I think the number one story in when you're looking at Sarver's sale of the Suns is that this was directly due to LeBron James, Chris Paul, other stars speaking out aggressively and loudly that this was not the way to go, that the punishment was not sufficient. It was insufficient. And the NBA Players Association Executive Director, Tamika Tremaglio, also spoke out. And she said, you know, Sarver should not ever be in a position where he's in charge of a managerial position ever again, I believe was one of her quotes. Very strong statement on that front. So for me, why this is positive is not that a new billionaire capitalist will purchase the Suns and like Bezos is in the running. I'm pretty sure I saw Bob Iger as well. You know, that's just a changing of the guard. But the fact that players are able to express themselves and move needles to this degree is a really important shift in this league, because they're the ones that make this league, not the billionaire owners who serve no function except to initially bundle capital to purchase the team and get it going. Once it's going, it's its own organism. People understand that. Billionaires don't go into purchasing professional leagues to make a ton of money, right? It kind of is just something that does churn money and it self-sustains, but it's not like a massive investment where you're going to see huge returns. Once it is going, it is a creation and it's its own brand, and it is of the players and the coaches and the people within that structure that make that brand. And so we have to be more aggressive in pushing for not just a new billionaire, a billionaire who has a better PR team who's going to buy these teams, but actual collective organizations is where the future should be going for professional teams. We're far away from that reality, but in terms of reframing the debate around this, that's where we should be at. And like, again, Sarver will make a ton of money off the sale, so spare me this persecution BS that I'm sure we'll be hearing about how this is cancel culture and nonsense like that. He will make a ton of money on this sale, and the reason he sold now is because he understood that the value of the team is going to keep dropping if he decided to hang on too much longer to the team out of spite, or out of stubbornness, which is like Dan Snyder 101 in the NFL with the Washington Commanders. For me, that leaves a lot of questions about where that goes. Dan Snyder under investigation for similar conduct in the owner of the Washington Commanders, who has been long understood to be a generally vile person, and also has not managed the team in a financially sound way. His ownership has driven a lot of people away, including his desire to hang on to the racist name that the Commanders used to have for until he was basically forced to change it. He said, as long as I shall live, they will always be named the Washington blank. No longer, because after the Black Lives Matter movement, there was like a public reckoning that made it impossible for him. But he wants to pass down this team to his kids, so he's holding on tightly to this in the middle of a congressional investigation in the NFL. I'm sorry, Dan Snyder's in the NFL. The congressional investigation is being done, I believe, by the Oversight Committee. But once those findings are released, we will have a lot more sunlight on what was happening here because the NBA, for its flaws in this situation, was infinitely more transparent than the NFL has been in terms of Dan Snyder's conduct. They released the findings of their investigation last year around July 4th weekend and hoped no one would pay attention. And the findings were thin in terms of like the details. They have not released many details about what they found Dan Snyder did. And for me, that speaks volumes. So there are degrees in which there are degrees difference between the way that the NBA and the NFL handles their vile owners and the NBA, despite valid criticism for how this was handled, is significantly ahead of other leagues, and particularly the NFL, which is, I would it dominates in terms of finances and is definitely the NBA's like main competitor for eyeballs.
And one thing I just want to mention is I think we just have to remember to, in a lot of that the average sports fan, and this is also I think due to some socializing on our part of this being a very common refrain from people being like, oh well, players make millions of dollars, like that they don't like they're so rich, like it shouldn't matter, like they don't need to be participating this much in in any sort of agitation or advocacy, like they're rich, they don't need to be doing this type of stuff when it comes to labor, it comes to like the conditions, working conditions and things like that. If you ever hear that argument, I just want people to remember that one, not everyone gets paid like LeBron James does in this league. There are so many people who, for this is a job. They are making six figures. They're not making hundreds of millions of dollars. And two,
and they have a finite period to actually make that money.
Right, and this is not a lifelong career. This is a fixed amount of time that someone can be a professional athlete, given the strain on people's bodies. And the concentration of wealth from these teams is still, despite the hundreds of millions of dollars these players are incurring for their play, for their actual labor, them playing the sport, they are still not receiving the majority share of it. That is going to the owners for essentially sitting on their ass and buying an NBA team. So these people, regardless of how fantastic their skills are, regardless of how larger than life they are still laborers.
Yep.
And they have a voice in this. So good for them for using it to get who by all accounts is a real sicko out of leadership in that organization.